So, 5 years of Kubernetes and looking to the future. What a title. I'm Pieter Lange. I do IT infrastructure. I've been doing that for quite a bit now. I have a GitHub page, and the last, well, not entire 5 years, but for most of it, I've been doing Kubernetes. It's quite a trip to keep up, so this is what people describe me as. And I was forced to make a Twitter handle, so there's that. Cool. So I always have to do this thing if I do give a talk. I have to poll you guys. So who is actually using Kubernetes in this room? That's this is beautiful. Keep them up in production. Awesome. This is quite different from a few years ago, right? Cool. Who was here at the last meeting? The one last year, across the eye? That's a lot less. Cool. All right. So, very little bit about myself. I was very lucky growing up. I had an attic full of old computers that my dad kept bringing in. So at age 7 or something, I had like 10 computers that I could always take apart. During high school, I joined the Jonge Onderzoekers, the young researchers. This was at the Technical University of Delft. They provided the space and, more importantly, 10 megabit internet access while I was still dialing in at home. So yeah, that was awesome. It came in over coax, by the way. So yeah, that's where I learned Linux, basically. You can imagine what part of the group in high school I was. The nerds. The nerds are popular now, or so people tell me. In college, we formed a group called the HOUK, the Hogeschool Utrecht Linux Kennisgroep, because we were basically very annoyed with there being basically no open source curriculum. And that's basically where things were going, and it was pretty obvious back then. I'm also a very big fan of stuff like Hackers at Large and the CCC events. And really all of these things have something in common. I think that's why we're all here. It's the community. You always do things with a group, you learn from each other, and you try to bring each other along with your findings. So yeah, today, some time ago, we also made the Kubernetes Addicts support group. This was basically for lack of the official group being very active. Adam actually initiated this, and we kept doing that pretty often. It's basically a self-help group for Kubernetes engineers. 3 years ago, this stuff was, Kubernetes is still hard. 3 years ago, this was super hard. So yeah, basically we joined in a group and we talked about our failures, and with the understanding that things were kept private. Nowadays, that's not so necessary anymore. People are quite open about talking about their failures. I think this is amazing. This is not something you very much expect. But yeah, Kubernetes failure stories is actually a thing now. So I think that's pretty great. So yeah, the agenda, Kubernetes, the last 5 years and the next 5 years. This is a subject I'm not very comfortable in. I generally do technical talks. I'm an infrastructure engineer. I don't do these thought leader stuff. So I'm your comic relief for the day. So yeah, this is my exercise in thought leading. Joe actually has a whole Twitter thread on this. I've picked a few. You can read along. Of course, every thought has to be original. Like everything has already been said today. I can talk about the history of Kubernetes, but Dan really gave a very good overview this morning of why Kubernetes became so great. I'm going to repeat him after him, of course, but yeah. And of course, yeah, this is a keynote. I came here by train, by the way, so in second class as well. So, a brief history. So how did I end up in the whole Kubernetes space? This guy, does anyone know him? Trick question. This is the guy that actually made the standard intermodal shipping container. And this thing basically made globalization and everything we have today work. His name was Malcolm McLean, and he did for international shipping what I think Kubernetes is doing for infrastructure. Basically, I am going to rehash this stuff because I'm the thought leader. So basically, what you had this very difficult problem. Stuff was weird, different formats, and you had this basic solution for it, container solution. And this solved a lot of problems because it was easier to ship, easier to handle. Things wouldn't cross-contaminate. I mean, you cannot put your coffee beans next to the spices and everything. So yeah, solved a lot of problems. So why Kubernetes? I had to make this pitch a few years ago when Kubernetes was not certain that it would become the leading thing. So I have to pitch this, right? And I basically took the slides I made well, whenever Kubernetes 1.0 was there, and had to convince my client, like, why do I have to invest in this massively complex piece of technology? And that's, like I said, I'm an open source guy. I like standards, open security. It's all very great. It's not because I'm some hippie. This guy is great, by the way. There's a very awesome Twitter or Reddit subreddit. Stallman was right. And yeah, he is very right, often. It's mostly about vendor lock-in. I had some very nasty experiences with some old vendors where we were basically back-built because we copied a machine, and now you should have bought 2 licenses. Oh, wow. Yeah. That kind of stuff is hard, especially in the cloud. You don't want to deal with any of that stuff. So this is another big reason this company had to move to the cloud. They wanted to use Docker. That was basically their only constraints. But they were a semi-governmental entity, and yeah, just saying use Docker, use Amazon. Have you really thought this through? What if in a few years you actually are forced to run things in your own data center again? Could happen. Yeah. So that was something I really was considering a lot. Of course, the whole thing had to have strong primitives. What does that mean? Well, it means that the base items are really well thought through and understandable and simple. Of course, it had to be modular, and if things didn't work, you had to swap it out. And again, no vendor lock-in. Oh yeah, and the swappable components, I had to make a bet on a container platform, and I knew that I wasn't going to stick around, forever, because IT. At some point, you get bored again, and you want to do something new. So I really had to think about, can someone else run this platform after me? Right, Bart? So I had to pick something open source. Well, if you have open source, what do you look for? How healthy is the community? Like, is there a broad base of support? Are people actually running this in production yet? If so, how many? Are they big and small companies? yeah, so Kubernetes ticked all these boxes. It's open, portable, flexible, healthy. Back then, this was a minor thing. But at least, well, the maturity was sort of proven as a concept because this is built on basic ideas. And Google has basically been doing that since forever. So that built some confidence. So, Docker Randstad. It was the first meetup I attended. It's first real foray into the community. Again, also Adam. Yeah, you were there. Oh, you were certainly there. I gave this talk at the Docker meetup. And this was really the early days of Kubernetes. And was about the secret life of pods. And this was a technical, and yeah, the movie just came out, so yeah, the secret life of pods. It was basically an exercise in teaching developers, this is your new runtime. It's not a VM. You have to think about 12-factor app stuff. And yeah. So that really kickstarted my whole experience with the business community, the meetup scene, which I think is great. I know a lot of people now from the meetup scene. So yeah. So that was well into my adventure of Kubernetes. What happened before that? Kubernetes is hard. Kubernetes is really hard, especially back then. And it was a lot of learning. Things were not in place yet. You had to make your own tools. There was no managed Kubernetes. Come on. Besides, I had to use Amazon, right? So this predates COPS. So yeah, you have to actually help build these tools. So that's what we did. And that's a hard sell as well for your client. Like, why are you helping these open source people build this thing? Well, we need this functionality, and it's not there. Was really hard. Yeah, all the classical operational stuff also had to happen. I made a very simple shell script that basically does a recursive kubectl get -o YAML. It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's really what it is. And that's now a backup tool that predates Velero or Heptio Arc. There was nothing there. And this basically just dumps your entire cluster state into a Git repo. And so you get nice diffs. It's actually a bad practice. Because why should you use something like that? If you do manual kubectl edit things on your cluster. And who's doing that, by the way? Whoever types kubectl edit? Yeah, dump. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah. So I was doing that. I had to acknowledge it. I mean, Google has a guideline to not write shell scripts, but they still have a style guide for shell scripts. So yeah, just acknowledge that it's there and do something about it. I had to make massive amounts of CI scripts because yeah, basically a lot of this stuff was not there. It was hard. You had to pick the right tools, and you have to sort of guess if the tools that you picked today, if they're going to be there tomorrow. Was running everything on CoreOS. Awesome. Really great product. Well, sometime last year they joined Red Hat. Red Hat joined IBM. Heptio is now VMware. Bitnami is at VMware. There's a big consolidation happening in the market as well. For a lot of people, it's very scary, but I think it's actually a sign of health. I mean, these things are going to be there in the future. Not Docker, though. Docker was not acquired. It's weird. Any ideas why not?
Microsoft tried to acquire them, and they rejected the offer back then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to say more.
And like Docker, it's amazing. It got us all to where we at. But at the same time, they also didn't really play well with the community all the time. That's weird. I remember the days that I had the capability of running Docker Swarm underneath my Kubernetes cluster, which was so. A lot of things happened over the last years. Industry definitely aligned on this. Kubernetes is the thing. And this is what we're going to do now. We're no infrastructure engineers. We have to call ourselves DevOps. Or I also have full stack on my shirt, and I know that's BS as well. So, okay. So, open source has really solidified itself as the thing to do now. I think that's really great. Something I was betting on years ago, and yeah, basically we couldn't get around it as an industry, I think. Kubernetes users became the biggest Slack channel. This is also pretty cool. But along the way, I think a lot of people forgot some of the old school ops things. Like the previous talks already mentioned this, but yeah, we reuse a lot of other people's tools, containers. Why is this happening? Why are we running applications as root inside of a cluster? It's like we learned nothing. Everyone's an admin now. Well, to be fair, I kind of pushed for this as well. I wanted developers to run their own applications. I don't want to babysit something I didn't make. I'll run your platform for you. You can build your own app. I'll help you do the nasty cloud-native thingies to make it run, but afterwards, you make something new, you ship it, you run it. I think that's the new normal as well for some companies. Yeah. Separation of concerns is also very hard. Everything is basically one big blast zone now, right? One big Kubernetes cluster. If it fails, everything's down. I run my logging and monitoring inside of the cluster. Yeah, you can see where this is going, right? So if something is up, how do you debug this stuff? I think these are the hard parts of what we're going to have to be concerned about next few years. Okay, this needs some explanation. We have a student on our full stack Slack channel, and he asked about, guys, how often do you guys, he's training for the LPI certification, which is basically the Linux basics. He asked about CA mod, and how often do you guys still do that? Okay, but these things do still matter, right? This is what makes the things run. So, are you ready for some thought leading? Service mesh. You heard it here first. Of course not. Service mesh is not going to fix your service mesh. Yeah, this is the quotable Twitter thing, yeah? And I said it here first. Think back about the thought leading slide. So now it's new, yeah? Cool. Kubernetes operators. Last year at the convention, I actually gave a very technical talk about CRDs and operators, and as a demo I made operator for deploying OpenVPN on your cluster, because I have a small tool to run OpenVPN on your cluster, but it's basically, to deploy it, you have to execute a bunch of shell scripts again. But operators are going to be like a defining feature, I think, of cloud native and Kubernetes. One particular operator or company that I want to mention here, because it's big on cross-cloud things, and this is again new and exciting stuff, so unstable. But Crossplane is a company that's basically going to enable us to do a kubectl create Postgres. And it will fork out to your cloud and deploy RDS or Cloud SQL or whatever. I think that's, again, pretty cool, because now everything is hidden behind your Kubernetes API. So yeah, I think operators, you're already using them if you are using a cert manager or yeah, anything. Or if you're using Ingress is sort of operator-ish thing. Observability, Twitter is full of it. Twitter is full of it, but also people mention observability a lot on Twitter. I think it's, we're dealing with distributed systems now, we have to understand what is happening there. So just logging is not enough anymore. What's really going to change the game here is OpenTelemetry. This is basically the combination of open census and open tracing. I think it's going to be a real core piece of our toolset in the coming years. Yeah, the Kubernetes SIG cluster API is also something I'm really looking forward to. Basically, you can create Kubernetes clusters from your Kubernetes API. And if you run your Kubernetes master on your laptop to bootstrap the eventual cluster, that's pretty cool, I think. And that gets us from declared state to actual infrastructure again. And I think that's pretty amazing. There's a few companies working really hard on this because it is really hard. Again, because this is coming back to provisioning actual iron, doing Pixie boot and that kind of stuff. It's still there, yeah. So yeah, I'm really looking forward on what's happening there. Of course, there's the big elephant in the room. Anyone want to shout? What's going to happen next? Come on, Todd lead. Vad? Providers? More providers? Cool, yeah. The big thing, where they even have conferences on it now. Serverless, of course. Come on, serverless. Well, we have abstracted all the way in Kubernetes. Now we need to go to serverless because, yeah, it's... So I do think serverless is going to be a thing, but it needs to, again, tick all of these open boxes, right? Otherwise, can you really trust it? Or can I really trust it? But OpenFaaS and especially Knative, I think, are already making big developments in this. Google has a commercial product based on this, on Knative, which Google Cloud Run, which is pretty cool. Yeah. Security, the other elephant in the room. Remember that kube backup script that I talked about earlier? So this thing has read access across your entire cluster, and it's reading all of your YAMLs, putting it into Git, right? So people run my image 20,000 times a day now. I don't have to store it in my Git repository. So I think there's something really big that needs to happen as well, because a lot of people are running random stuff from weirdos on the internet. You can easily make a fork of the repo and just host it yourself, and you don't have to deal with the fact of some remote person that you have no contracts with or whatever. That can override this tag and have you run weird code. Security is definitely something that needs a lot more work, I think. There's a lot of vendors in this space as well, but Kubernetes is already providing us with very solid security principles. We can already do it, It's just that people are not doing it. Almost everyone who uses Helm, the basic instructions is now give cluster admin to your tiller instance. Well, of course, this is the big complaint about Helm. I think it's easily fixable. Is Rimas here? No, he's probably at the booth. But he wrote one of the founders of Helm. He wrote a very nice plugin to run tillerless Helm. You can just run with the local cube scope. Easy. Not easy, but doable. Almost nobody is doing it. So I'm going to do a quick little poll here again. Who's happy about their RBAC setup? Only one. Two. Yeah, there's a few banks, maybe. Okay, so RBAC, it's like the basics, right? Network policies, like back in the day, I had to go through like 5 network admins to finally get my rules passed. Now you can do your own firewall rules, but again, nobody is isolating their workloads, really. Or that's what I'm seeing a lot. And it takes work. You have to actually do that stuff. I don't see a lot of Helm charts coming with network policies by default. Right? Cool. So, and pod security policies, yeah, almost nobody is running that. Yeah. It's broken. Cool. Why?
I don't know. I've been reading so much and I've been working so much with it. They acknowledge in their own thread in 1.15 you will have solved it. And this is right now, right?
Uh-huh. Well, there's a lot of policies you can set, and I bet there's a few broken, but I've used pod security policies. You can still do it. So yeah. Oh yeah, this is of course the major thing. In 5 years' time, people will still be bickering about kubectl versus kubectl or whatever. This is random size. I don't prefer any words. Just get on with it. Come on. And yeah, finally, global warming. Yeah, this is a thing. And it's very, very near to me. Last year, I joined a small little startup in Delft. And they were doing something really cool, and I want to give them a shout out. It was Nerdalize. They basically made something that I can only imagine in the scope of Kubernetes. So, because they were selling cloud and then reusing the heat from the computers to heat showers. That was really cool. And a lot of the power in data centers is still going to cooling. It's weird. It's useful energy. You can do something with it. Unfortunately, you don't build something like that. They had no more money in that to shut down. But I think the idea is still viable. So, lastly, I have to quickly round up here, but we will still have legacy systems in the future. I know it sucks, but they will be there. I'm currently at a company that's still running this software. It's running in TWM, VNC stuff. Dates from the SCO era, yeah? Okay, cool. That's 30 years old software, it's still running today, and will for a long time in the future. So finally, the community is you, of course, you're all here. Please also give talks. Everyone has something to share, everyone. And thank you.